Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Med Device Cyber Podcast. I'm here with Paul, he's a guest, and we also have Trevor, who's our co-host. I'm Christian Espinoza, the founder of Blue Goat Cyber, and we have a guest today, Paul. He is from Alpha Sophia. Paul, you want to tell us what Alpha Sophia does and how you fit into the MedTech space?
Yeah, sure. First of all, Christian and Trevor, thanks a lot for having me on the pod today. It's a great pleasure spending the next minutes, the hour, chatting with you about the MedTech space, about cybersecurity, and how MedTech startups best launched market in that environment. So with Alpha Sophia, we've built what we call a commercial intelligence platform for the US healthcare market. So that means we've basically built a platform which helps medical device companies, but also digital health companies, and all other life sciences companies, basically anyone who tries to engage with healthcare providers in the US to launch their products to market, find the right physicians, practices, hospitals, and so on to market to for their specific products and use cases they are offering with their products.
Okay, awesome. Given like your experience with these startups trying to find the right audience, what trends are you seeing with in medtech and people launching their new products?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few trends. Like, first of all, I think the US healthcare market is getting more and more important. I mean, it has always been the largest healthcare market in the world, but that trend is continuing to go on, especially with regulatory processes in Europe, for example, being a bit slower at the moment, which leads to many medtech startups, but also the digital health startups and so on in Europe to look to the US market first and first launch on the US market. And then secondly, I think another big trend is that besides traditional medtech with physical devices, the share of companies who either have a fully digital solution, maybe, I don't know, also maybe an AI or software-based solution, or companies who have a mixture of both, where it's a physical device coupled with software and so on, is steadily increasing. And that's probably also something you are seeing in your work when it comes to helping those companies make sure that from a cybersecurity perspective, every checkboxes are marked. I don't know whether you see a similar trend.
What do you think, Trevor? Do we see more devices that are a combination of hardware and software, or more that are just software now?
I think it's a pretty solid mix, but what's becoming more uncommon is just pure hardware. It seems like there's always going to be some digital component or a cloud component attached, whether it's only the cloud component or a combination of the two.
I do agree.
And so you're saying, Paul, that in the US you feel is one of the bigger markets. I know Trevor and I had some discussions, and I think the Middle East is going to become a bigger market, and then maybe even China. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, I mean, traditionally the US is at least 40% of the global healthcare market. And then probably from a value capture perspective, it's even more because average margins in the US are higher compared to other places in the world.
Well, we have the most health issues in the US too, probably. So that might be a contributing factor.
Yeah. The most health problems and the most expensive healthcare.
Exactly.
But that being said, you're totally right, especially like the Middle East is really ramping up. I think a few weeks ago, Arab Health in Dubai was, I think, one of the largest trade shows in the space that was ever held. And you also see countries there, the country governments heavily investing into healthcare. And then, of course, I think what is quite favorable for those environments, especially in the Middle East, is that they often adapt methodologies and regulatory pathways from the US, for example. I don't know, for example, the American Medical Association terminology is also being used widely in the Middle East. So it's quite easy, comparatively, for companies who are used to the US healthcare market, but then also launch products in the Middle East, for example.
Yeah, I saw a lot of posts about Arab Health. We missed that one. We'll be at MedTech World in Dubai in a couple weeks, though. So a little bit smaller event, but next year we'll be sure and hit Arab Health. I know Trevor has some connections in Saudi Arabia. We're trying to get into that market over there, as well as UAE and Qatar. I think those are a few areas that are kind of like, it's like the race to see who can be the medtech hub of the Middle East. I feel like over there.
Yeah. What's your impression? Are those countries predominantly a healthcare market in terms of a buyer of medical devices or medical software solutions? Or is there also innovation from a manufacturing point happening in those countries?
Yeah, when I was in Dubai last, I did this tour where they had the Sheik's vision of the future, and they are really trying to make a lot of innovations in healthcare. So I feel like they want to become the manufacturer as well as a buyer, kind of both, really.
Yeah.
What I know you primarily help the organizations get their product in the right hands and the right audience, but what is like some of the biggest hurdles these startups have? We know what the hurdles are from cybersecurity, but when they get the device cleared by the FDA or MDR, then what happens from your perspective? Like, what are the hurdles that they have?
Yeah, so we usually start engaging with our customers usually 1 or 2 years before they reach final FDA approval the earliest, or when they already have launched products to market and want to further accelerate growth, or have an established product line on the market and want to open up further potential customer cohorts. So we are from a stage perspective, we are a bit later than you usually engage with your customers, which is, to my understanding, rather in the early R&D phase or later R&D phase, where you help them with cybersecurity issues and making sure everything is in compliance. I think the biggest issue for any manufacturer of medical products still is, first of all, how do you find the right potential customers, the right physicians, practices, hospitals, and so on to talk to? And then secondly, how do you get the attention of those busy doctors where doctors are super busy? You might there's this traditional saying of maybe catching them at the operating room sink for a few minutes, and then you have like 2-3 minutes to make your point, and that is getting harder and harder. So you need to be more creative when it comes to building what we call an omni-channel strategy of approaching or nurturing those potential customers over time to warm them up for the products and services you're selling, and then to eventually convert them into customers. And the best thing to do is basically don't think there is a silver bullet out there, but you need to find, first of all, the really specific right customer cohort for you, so that you're not spending any resources on potential targets who will never convert because they can't use your product or are not a good fit, don't have the patience to treat with your product, and so on. And then secondly, also find providers who are actually open to new innovative solutions and are open to adopting them. And then thirdly, it's not going to go in a way that you send out one cold email or do one cold call or do one sample drop at the practice, and then suddenly they convert into customers. But it's more like you need a 360-degree strategy where you to create content and reach out and nurture those potential customers with your content. You need to be on multiple platforms. You need to go to conventions and maybe meet them in person. You need to eventually visit them also and show them your solution to build trust, but at the same time also build up an audience for your company and the products you're selling, for example, on LinkedIn or other social media platforms to create multiple touch points with your potential customers.
Yeah, it's interesting. You start working with your clients, you said a couple years, 1 or 2 years before their device is on the market.
The earliest, yeah.
Yeah, with us, they typically come to us, manufacturers, like within like 6 weeks or 8 weeks before they're trying to submit to the FDA or the MDR. It's like they kind of like totally forget about cybersecurity until the regulatory authority person says, hey, we got to submit all this cybersecurity documentation with our package. And then they, in a panic, reach out to us. So it causes a lot of costly delays to them because we typically find a lot of vulnerabilities. Trevor, on average, but how quickly or how soon do people come to us before the submission date, do you think? And then what kind of vulnerabilities do we typically find?
I think, it's a pretty widespread, but unfortunately it's, usually towards the end, people will come to us even saying we need to submit in 3 or 4 weeks, and we completely forgot about cybersecurity. And it's just not feasible at that point. They're often hundreds of pages of documents that you need to prepare, a lot of design changes you need to do, and we're pretty good at finding vulnerabilities in these devices, especially now that everything has a cloud component, everything has software. The cloud components especially, we find problems constantly. So when we identify these, it can require some pretty sweeping design changes to maintain functionality while still building in security. And it's something where if they come to us, 6 months before they're planning to submit, okay, great. They can change their course a little bit, but it's not gonna cause anything too dangerous and any major delays. When they're coming to us in these final phases of the submission with a few weeks to go, and then they find vulnerabilities that are going to take a redesign of the product, then they're pushed back by 2 more months. So ideally, people come to us as early as possible. Unfortunately, that's not usually what happens.
Of course. I am curious about both of your perspectives on something, because I've heard you talk about this before, Trevor, and Paul, you probably have a perspective as well. When a buyer of one of these medical devices is making a purchasing decision, do they actually care about the cybersecurity of the device and like the risk associated with the device and how it's going to be interoperable with their environment? Is that something that's factored into a purchasing decision? I'll let you answer that one first, Paul, and then throw it over to Trevor.
I think from a security perspective, I think it has always 2 layers. There's always this hygiene layer of course, physicians or potential buyers expecting that the device is secure. Yeah, and of course, often they use regulatory approval as a proxy for this. But then on top of that, they might ask question, and if you are trying to sell to them, you better have good answers about that in order to convince them about the safety of your product. Because, in the end, those physicians are taking a personal risk using it on their patients, and then they want to be 100% sure that the device is safe. I think the second point you mentioned is really important and getting more and more important, interoperability of those devices, because we all know that from our private life, where when we have different devices and they don't work together, we probably stop using one of them at some point because it's just too cumbersome to start having them and they don't fit into our other ecosystem. And the same is true for providers. So they want to make sure the product fits into their existing medical device environment or suite of products they're using for their treatments.
Awesome. What do you think, Trevor?
Yeah, I agree. I think that we're seeing a lot more awareness in buyers. A lot of manufacturers are coming to us, even with a device that's fielded under old guidance that they don't technically have to do this testing for. And they say, we're getting a lot of customer requests for a penetration test. We need better labeling. How can we figure this out? Part of the reform that we've done internally with our process is not only gearing up manufacturers to be ready for the FDA, but getting manufacturers ready for their customers. So the documentation requirements for the FDA for labeling is going to be the big one that applies here. They're certainly present. They're fairly comprehensive, but they're not as comprehensive often as what the customers are asking for. So we've adapted our process a little bit to cover just about anything that anyone could think of. So anytime a customer comes with it's like you said, if a customer is coming with these questions, they say, well, it's great that it's approved. But we still have these questions about cybersecurity. Manufacturers need to have an answer. So we're trying to gear them up with as many of these answers as we can before they're even cleared. So they're just ready to go as soon as they get to market.
One thing I was thinking about when I think, Paul, you were talking is from a liability perspective, if I am the healthcare provider and I purchase this medical device and I don't scrutinize it for cybersecurity, and there's an issue with it, am I liable or is the manufacturer liable? If let's say it's a surgical robot that I just kind of ignore the cybersecurity about it and I purchase it, but then the device is compromised from a cybersecurity perspective and messes up the surgery and paralyzes somebody. In that scenario, who's actually liable? I'm
not a lawyer and that probably also depends on the jurisdiction you're in. But in the end, every healthcare practitioner across the world has always a personal ethos where they need to make sure that they are treating their patients in the best possible way. And that, of course, always applies. So as you mentioned, Trevor, the questions from customers can often be even much harder than what the regulatory body demands for.
Yeah, I would think as a user of this device, I would want to make sure I do my due diligence. So I make a decision to purchase a device that's actually secure, that's not going to be compromised when I connect it to my ecosystem. Because, as a surgeon, I would hate for the device to cause some error during the surgery and cause some complication. So I think the due diligence from the buyer perspective is probably increasing as that awareness increases, or maybe it's not. I don't know. A lot of people still don't understand cybersecurity.
I mean, it also depends. Yeah, in the end, there might be customers who don't ask for it, but in the end, as a manufacturer, you want to prepare for the hardest questions that can approach you from your whole potential customer cohort. Because once you're not able to answer them, that's gonna circulate in the community, and especially like in small niche therapeutic markets. Practitioners speak to each other, they meet at conferences and so on. And if there's a word out, that company couldn't answer my questions about, is that device really safe properly, that's probably not good for your brand and the trust in your product.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I guess they talk to each other, and cybersecurity is becoming a little more concerned these days, especially since a lot of devices have been recalled recently. So it sounds like people aren't just relying on the FDA or MDR to their stamp of approval. They're actually doing more due diligence, the buyers behind the scenes, which is kind of new to me. I thought most people would just say, oh, the FDA approved it, it's good to go from a cybersecurity perspective. But it seems like from your experience, and maybe some of what you said, Trevor, too, dealing with some of our clients, that the buyers are actually going deeper than the FDA or the MDR or PMDA, whatever the regulatory authority is.
Yeah, I think that it's a mix. A lot of buyers are just not aware of cybersecurity, and ultimately, I just think it comes down to an awareness problem and an education problem. Oftentimes, like a more established, a more developed hospital or a more developed clinic will be a little bit more concerned about things like this, or especially a clinic that's experienced a cybersecurity incident in the past, they're obviously going to be very, very concerned about it. Ties back into that interoperability area. I think one of the first big attacks that were not targeting healthcare infrastructure, but affecting healthcare infrastructure was WannaCry ransomware, which just tore through hospital networks, and it jumped into medical devices, then moved into workstations, and it would lock up everything that it hit. And so it would use these devices to move through the network. So I think customers are getting a little bit more aware of events like that happening. They've heard about the Vegas hacks. They've heard about the, United Healthcare hacks. They've heard about all these different things that have happened, and they don't want it to happen to them. They don't want to be the ones liable. They don't want to be the ones that, get compromised and then they lose customer faith. And so it is becoming a little bit more in the public eye and something that people are more aware of when they're trying to make a purchasing decision.
I kind of feel like a lot of people still don't care about cybersecurity with medical devices because there may be, but I think people have not directly tied a patient death to a medical device hack. I think things have happened and they've tried to not tie the two together, but if you do your research, at least I have done a lot of research, there's no direct one-to-one. This device was hacked, this patient died, or this device was hacked, this patient was paralyzed. But I have a feeling these things have happened. We're just sort of covered up from probably from a liability perspective.
I mean, and the effect on the patient always has two sides. It can be that, a device is malfunctioning and then directly has a negative impact on the patient. But it could also be that infrastructure is not working. And then, I don't know, the patient who would need a surgery can't go into surgery because there are a few critical devices who are currently out of order, don't work, and then the critical surgery is delayed, and then this has knock-on effects, and then at a much later point leads to a negative patient outcome. That might be one of the reasons why people don't directly connect it, because sometimes it's not immediate, but goes through a couple of steps until it really then leads to overall negative patient outcomes.
I know there have been, I believe it was the United Healthcare breach where the hospital infrastructure pretty much across the entire US was shut down. And so there were a lot of problems with ingesting patients into emergency rooms and a lot of delays. And there were actually a couple reported cases. I believe it was 2 or 3 patients died because they weren't able to get admitted into an emergency room quickly enough. And so it's indirect, but it is still the result of a major cybersecurity event against healthcare infrastructure.
Yeah, I know there was also the Therac 25 as a radiation therapy machine that was it had a software issue. I don't know if it's a cyber attack, but 6 people were greatly injured and because of that. It's a problem, but yeah, I think it's hard to correlate directly with the device. I mean, unless it's doing a surgery, like a surgical robot, and it goes crazy or something. And I think we're migrating towards, pretty soon we're going to have autonomous surgical robots that are doing the surgery all by themselves, and that's a scary scenario for me. I don't know what y'all's thoughts are on that. What that thing is compromised. There's no surgeon there to grab it and take it away from the patient or anything to take over.
I think in general, like, the purpose of a hacker isn't usually to hurt someone, it's to get money. And so the target isn't always going to be, how can I hack into this medical device to hurt someone? It's how can I hack into this medical device to either A, steal information, or B, leave the device into the network and do a ransomware attack. I think that, part of ransomware attacks, they're non-discriminate. They will attack anything, and they proliferate through a network. And so if they hit something critical like an autonomous robot, they lock down the entire thing. Nothing is happening. If that happens in the middle of surgery, the patient's all cut open and there's no surgeon to do anything, and the robot's just going to lock up and it's not going to know what to do. I think that's what the more realistic scenario is, as opposed to someone trying to hack into a surgical robot to try to kill someone or hurt someone. I think just indiscriminate attacks hitting medical devices is a major concern and something that we have seen happen in the past.
Aren't these devices considered part of our critical infrastructure or migrating that way, though? So, like, if I'm a nation state actor and I want to create havoc and I attack every IVD system in a particular country, wouldn't I achieve that objective, though, if that's my goal?
It would definitely have a pretty big effect. I think that historically we've seen nation state actors and like cyber terrorists target power grids and electric infrastructure more, because it's a very immediate, noticeable effect. But I certainly wouldn't be surprised if something similar were to happen against healthcare infrastructure, especially something widespread. Obviously, locking down any healthcare for any amount of time in a country would be a massive, massive crisis.
In terms of, you mentioned earlier that often your clients approach you quite close to a regulatory deadline. What would you say would be the ideal process for let's say, a medical device startup just getting started? They have an idea for a new device. At which point should they reach out to you and start thinking about cybersecurity?
As soon as they start working on their requirements for the product. So cybersecurity should be baked in as a non-functional requirement in every part of the device. That's the official stance that we take. That's the official stance that the FDA takes, the MDR takes. All of these regulatory authorities, if you read through their guidance documents, says that cybersecurity should be designed into a device and not bolted on after the fact. I think that as a manufacturer has an idea, they want to create a product, and they start thinking, okay, how are we actually going to do this? What does the product need to do? There are sort of 2 sets of requirements that they're going to think about. What does it do and how does it do it? And we need to be part of the how does it do it. So as soon as they're developing these requirements, cybersecurity should be considered right there.
And I think, Paul, like what does it do? And when they're thinking about that, that's probably the right time to engage with you, because if there's not a market out there for this product, or not a big enough market, and they have to spend all this money developing it, that's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing we, for example, help our customers with is actually finding how large potential markets for their solutions are, where you can use our platform, Alpha Sophia, to then see for a certain therapeutic field, or even by specific procedure codes, how many cases are being performed per year in the US, who are doing those, where those providers are located. Are they rather in smaller practices or in larger hospitals, and so on? How's this procedure developing? Is it increasing in size, or is it decreasing, and so on? So that often helps companies in an early phase to actually get an understanding of their total addressable market, and then maybe even make adjustments in the design process to cover other indications as well, or focus on one indication and really nail it, and so on.
Do you run into MedTech innovators that it's going to take like $10 million, or let's say $20 million to develop their product, but their total addressable market is only $20 million? Does that scenario come up very often?
Yeah, I mean, it's usually companies who start working with us are usually already a bit further along, and they have secured funding, and then usually venture capital companies or other investors have done their due diligence, and market size is usually one of the big check boxes to pass through. So the customers we engage with usually have a large market or really valuable market, and so on. But definitely, if you speak to innovators and so on, it sometimes happens that a potential market is overestimated, or that the advantage of the own product might be overestimated in an early phase, and then eventually it might still be better than existing solutions, but the transaction cost for the health system overall to switch to your new solution is too high. So even your slight advantage won't lead to your ability to actually capture that market. So there, of course, I mean, we all know there are multiple reasons medical device companies can fail. It's probably one of the hardest categories to innovate in. And we want to make sure that those companies who have gone the long way of being able to find a product for a new application or for an existing application, actually design it, build it, start manufacture it, go through regulatory approval, and so on, are then also able to distribute it to the right patients who need it in the most efficient and in the fastest way.
One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking is, because I hear this come up quite often, is about insurance. And, Europe is, and the countries in Europe are very different than the United States as far as healthcare insurance. But if I'm a medtech innovator and I have a new product, how important is it that insurance starts covering the use of that product to the manufacturer?
I mean, it's super important because that's ultimately your business model and your revenue stream. But it really depends on the product you are launching or bringing to market. There might be a product where already existing reimbursement path exists, and you can basically piggyback on existing reimbursement path. It might be something totally new, and then you have to talk to commercial insurances, but also Medicare and so on, to find a way to get your product reimbursed at some point. And oftentimes it's a mixture of both. People start with an existing pathway and then try to get their own one later on. And then also you have things where people have innovative business models where it's maybe, I don't know, a pay-as-you-go model, or other types of subscriptions for digital health solutions and so on, which are not yet covered, and then they definitely have to engage in discussions early with payers to find a reimbursement path for their solution.
And but from your experience between the U.S. and Europe, which healthcare system is easier for a medtech innovator to get their product adopted in, do you think?
I mean, you can't say it in a universal way for every type of product. It really depends on the type of product you're launching. For example, in the digital health space in Germany a few years ago, there was a new initiative launched which made it quite easy. I mean, still hard, but quite easy compared to other healthcare markets to get reimbursement for your digital device, for subscriptions for digital health solutions. And then other devices, there might be something existing in that market already, and it's easier to piggyback on that. So it really depends on the therapy you're trying to offer. Generally speaking, the difficult thing about Europe is that one European healthcare market doesn't exist. It's 28 European healthcare markets, and they're all different, right? I mean, of course, there's similarities, but they're still all different. So it still depends on your product, and you always have to make the due diligence and talk to specific experts. What makes sense? Where to launch first? Where to launch then, and so on.
Yeah, I guess that's true. There's 28. There's a EU MDR, so there's a European Union, but each country has its own specific rules and regulations.
I mean, you have one MDR, but in the end, like everyone has different insurance systems and reimbursement path and so on.
It's probably not as complicated as the U.S. healthcare system, but it's still pretty complicated. I think the U.S. It seems like the U.S. should just find the country that has the best healthcare system and model that one, But we tend to do it and make it overly complicated. It's pretty challenging over here. I need to go to a dentist. I had like a part of my filling fall out today, and I'm dreading it. I don't like going to the dentist. I don't even know if I have insurance for that either. Trevor goes to the dentist pretty routinely, though. I understand.
Are you not supposed to go to the dentist routinely?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
When there's an issue. Last time I went, I almost passed out. They drilled a filling in or a cap or whatever, and it hurt so badly I almost passed out. So I've avoided it since then.
Yeah, that's a fair reason.
Yeah, I had these like. That I don't think the Novocaine worked or whatever, but it is what it is. Awesome. Well, we're coming up on time here. What would you say for some last minute words of wisdom, Paul, to a MedTech innovator that's let's say it's an MD that has a brilliant idea and he's talking to an engineer like a lot of the startups and they're just getting started. What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I think the first thing everyone should know, it's a long journey and you should prepare for that long journey. I think we can both all agree that it always makes sense to rather tackle potential problems in the future early when it comes to regulatory or quality things like cybersecurity, or when it comes to the point where you want to launch to market. And one theme that is going to be with you the whole time is that you're always in a resources or budget constrained environment. So you should always try to get things right the first time, find the right people to talk to. Don't waste, in our case, marketing and sales dollars on channels or cohorts that don't work. Don't delay your cybersecurity work by too long, so that you then have to do a catch up, which is probably more expensive than doing it the first time right, and so on. So prepare for a long road. It's probably going to be a really rewarding one if you're able to succeed and bring your solution to market and ultimately help patients. But it's going to be a long long one. At the same time, I think it can be also a lot of fun, innovating in such a space where a lot of really passionate people work, where people really care first and foremost about making an impact for patients. And I think that can be really rewarding.
When you say a long road, like how long are you typically seeing? This sounds a little bit scary. Like prepare for like this long journey. Like
it depends on the product, but I mean, easily it can take 6 years or longer, 8 years until you are able to launch the market. I don't know what you're seeing, but it varies by product class, but it can take many years until you're able to actually start selling your solution at some point.
Yeah, it's not success overnight. Trevor, what's your parting words of wisdom?
I think just in general, making sure that everyone's spreading awareness about cybersecurity. Customers are becoming more and more aware, I think, at a faster rate than manufacturers. And so manufacturers need to catch up so that they're A, ready for the regulatory bodies, and then they're B, ready for their customers once the time comes.
Well, thanks so much, Paul, for being a guest on the Med Device Cyber Podcast. And thanks for tuning in.